I need a wife by tomorrow. The words hit the crowded general store like a rifle shot. Every head turned. Every breath stopped. Boone Mercer, the man most of Redemption Ridge crossed the street to avoid, stood at the counter with his jaw locked and his eyes wild with something no one had ever seen on his face before. Fear. Not fear of another man. Not fear of winter or wolves or the wilderness that had swallowed lesser men whole. Fear of losing something he hadn't even held yet. If this story already has your heart, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, follow every part of this story to the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that moment. Back to Boone Mercer standing in that store, and the one woman in the room who didn't run. The general store on Redemption Ridge's Main Street was never quiet at mid-morning. Trappers came in to trade. Old women argued over flower prices. Children pressed their noses against the glass cases where penny candy sat in jars. It was the one place in that hard mountain town where people still gathered, still talked, still pretended that life up here wasn't grinding them down one frozen winter at a time. Boone Mercer almost never came in. When he did, people moved. Not out of courtesy, out of habit. The way you move when a storm rolls in off the peaks, not because you've decided to, but because your body already knows. How is a big man? Not the kind of big that comes from vanity or sport, but the kind that comes from years of cutting timber, hauling stone, and refusing help. His coat was heavy canvas patched at both elbows. His beard had gone untrimmed through most of the autumn. He had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved rather than born, all angles and weathered lines with eyes so dark they seemed to pull light in rather than give it back. He walked into the store that Tuesday morning, and every conversation in the room died. He didn't look at anyone. He walked straight to the counter where Elira Voss was tallying a ledger, set both his hands flat on the wooden surface, and spoke loud enough for the whole room to hear. Not because he wanted an audience, but because he had never in his life learned how to make himself small. I need a wife by tomorrow. Silence. Not the polite kind. The stunned kind. The kind where people stop mid-breath and look at each other with wide eyes, trying to confirm that they heard what they think they heard. Old Gerald Hatch, who'd been examining a tin of tobacco near the door, actually set it down. Clara Moody, who ran the seamstress shop next door and came in every Tuesday for thread, pressed her lips together so hard they went white. 3 men near the wood stove stopped their card game and stared. Elira Voss looked up from her ledger. She didn't gasp. She didn't step back. She just looked at him the way she looked at most things in this town, with a calm so deliberate it almost passed for coldness. Her eyes were pale gray, like winter sky before snow, and they had a steadiness to them that most people in Redemption Ridge found unsettling. She'd been running this store for 4 years. She'd heard desperate men before. She'd heard men who were drunk men, who were broke men, who were grieving men, who were lying through their teeth. She had never heard one say that. "I'm sorry," she said. "You heard me." Boone's voice was raw, not angry. Raw the way skin gets when you've scrubbed it past the point of pain. "I need a wife, legal, by tomorrow morning before the 10 o'clock train." Clara Moody made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a cough. "Boone Mercer," Gerald Hatch said carefully, Are you feeling all right?" Boone didn't even look at him. His eyes hadn't moved from Elira's face. "There's a child coming," he said. "On that train, tomorrow." More silence. Different this time. Loaded. "A child," Elira repeated. "A girl." He stopped, swallowed hard. The tendons in his jaw worked. "She's 7 years old. Her name is Ivy. She's mine. I didn't know she existed until 3 weeks ago, when I got a letter from a woman named Cora Dales in Billings, telling me she was dying." He paused again. "Cora died 12 days ago. And now the county is sending Ivy here on tomorrow's train, and there's a man, a court-appointed man, who's going to look at my situation and make a determination." "What kind of determination?" Elira asked. Boone's hands pressed harder against the counter. She could see the knuckles go pale. "Whether I'm fit to raise her, or whether she goes to the state home in Helena." The card game did not resume. Clara Moody sat down on a barrel of dried beans, as if her legs had simply stopped working. "They told me," Boone said, and his voice dropped not softer but lower, the way a fire goes lower when it's burning its last fuel, that a single man alone in the mountains is not a suitable environment. That's the word they used. Suitable. They want a home, a stable home. 2 parents. He stopped. "So I need a wife." Elira looked at him for a long moment. She had the particular stillness of a woman who had learned very early that reaction cost more than composure. "Why are you asking me?" she said. And the room held its breath. That was when something shifted in Boone Mercer's face. He had come in here with a jaw set like iron and eyes braced for rejection. She could see that. He had prepared himself for no. He had probably rehearsed the argument. He probably had a counter for every objection. But he hadn't prepared for that question. "Why me?" He opened his mouth, closed it. His brow drew together, and for a moment, just a moment, the hard shell of him cracked just enough for something real to show through. "Because," he said slowly, "you're the only person in this town who doesn't look at me like I'm something to be afraid of." Elira held his gaze. "I didn't say I wasn't afraid of you," she said. "No," he said, "but you didn't move." She told him to wait. She went into the back room of the store, the small space behind the curtain where she kept the inventory and did the books, and she stood very still for 60 seconds, with her hands pressed flat against the shelf, and breathed. She thought about what she knew about Boone Mercer, which was not much and more than she wanted. She knew he'd come to Redemption Ridge about 6 years ago, bought 40 acres up in the high country, built a cabin with his own hands, and proceeded to live as though the rest of humanity had agreed to leave him alone. He came into town 3 or 4 times a year for supplies. He paid in cash. He didn't owe anyone anything, and he didn't let anyone owe him. He'd had exactly 1 fight in town that she knew of 2 winters back, when a man named Pike had made a remark about something nobody was quite sure what, and Boone had put him through the door of the saloon. Not through the doorway, through the door. The actual wooden door. Pike had left town within the month. She also knew because she made it her business to know everything about the economics of this town, because the store's survival depended on it, that Boone Mercer was not poor. He trapped, he timbered, he did work for hire in the summer months that other men wouldn't touch. He had money saved, not a fortune, but real money. She knew he was alone. She knew he was proud, and she now knew he was desperate enough to walk into a public place and say the most humiliating thing a proud man could say. She came back out through the curtain. The store had not emptied. If anything, it had quietly filled. Word traveled fast on a slow Tuesday morning, and she could see 2 more faces near the window that hadn't been there before. Boone was still at the counter. He hadn't moved. He hadn't bought himself a coffee or pretended to look at the goods on the shelf. He just stood there waiting, which told her more about his state of mind than anything he'd said. She came back to the counter and looked at him steadily. "Come back at 2 o'clock, she said. "I'll give you an answer then." He stared at her. "That's I have to arrange the 2 o'clock, she said again. "If your answer is worth having, you can wait 4 hours for it." Something moved across his face. It might have been respect. It might have been irritation. With a face like his, the two looked similar. He turned and walked out. The room exploded. Clara Moody was at the counter before the door had finished swinging shut. "Elira. Elira, you cannot be seriously considering—" "I'm not considering anything yet," Elira said. She picked up her pencil and opened the ledger again. "He put a man through a door," Clara said. "I heard. He doesn't speak to people. He doesn't come to church. Nobody even knows where he goes half the time up in those mountains. He could be—" Clara lowered her voice. "He could be anything." Elira wrote a number in the ledger column. "He could be," she agreed. "You've been alone a long time," Clara said, and her voice changed, softened, cautious, the way voices go when they're approaching something they've been told not to touch. "I understand that, I do. But this isn't a real marriage, Elira. This is a desperate man using you to save his daughter," Elira said. Clara stopped. A 7-year-old girl, Elira said, still writing, whose mother just died, who is coming on a train tomorrow to a place she's never been, to a father she's never met. And if this doesn't work out... She set the pencil down and looked up. She goes to the state home in Helena Clara. Do you know what those places are like? Clara's mouth worked silently. I know what they're like, Elira said. The store had gone quiet again, but differently now. Not the shocked quiet from before, the thoughtful kind. Gerald Hatch cleared his throat near the door. Well, he said carefully. The man did ask respectful. Gerald, Clara said. He did, he insisted. Didn't threaten, didn't demand, came in and asked. He turned the tobacco tin over in his hands. That's more than some men manage. At 2 o'clock, Boone came back. The store was quieter now. Elira had asked the stragglers to finish their shopping or come back tomorrow, and they had gone, though she suspected several of them were loitering within earshot outside. She didn't particularly care. Boone came in, looked around to confirm they were effectively alone, and came to the counter. She had a piece of paper on the counter. She had spent the 4 hours writing and crossing out and rewriting, and what she had now was a single page with 6 items on it. Sit down, she said. He looked at the stool beside the counter with something like suspicion, then sat. She turned the paper so he could read it. He read it. He read it again. You wrote conditions, he said. I wrote conditions, she confirmed. He looked up at her. You wrote 6 conditions. Count them again. He did. 6. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the paper. She watched his face the way she watched weather for information, not beauty. The first one, he said finally. The store. Ownership transferred to my name, she said. Fully. I've been running it for 4 years on behalf of old Mr. Fenwick in Billings, who bought it as an investment and has never set foot here. I've made it what it is. I want it to be mine. If I'm giving up my life here to go up into the mountains with you, the store comes with me, or rather stays with me legally as mine. Boone looked at her for a moment. That's going to cost me. Yes, she said. He went back to the paper. The second. No physical, it says no physical expectations. It means what it says. He looked up. His expression was flat, unreadable. I wasn't planning to. I know you weren't planning to, she said evenly. I want it in writing anyway. Something shifted in his eyes. Not offense. Something closer to understanding. All right, he said. The third, she said before he could reach it. The child comes first. Whatever disagreements you and I have, whatever this arrangement is or isn't when it comes to Ivy, we present a united front. I won't undermine you to her, and you won't undermine me. He was very still. You're already thinking about her. I've been thinking about her since this morning, Elira said. She's the reason any of this matters, isn't she? He looked at the paper and didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Fourth, he said quietly. You want to be able to leave. After 1 year, if you determine. If the situation with Ivy is stable and the court has satisfied itself, Elira said. Yes, I want the right to walk away with my store, my name, and no claim against me. And you want the right to ask me to stay if things have gone well. He looked up. I want the right to ask. I thought you'd appreciate having it written down. Something that was almost a smile moved the corner of his mouth and vanished before it arrived. And the fifth, you tell me the truth, she said. All of it. About Cora. About Ivy. About whatever you did or didn't do that ended with a 7-year-old girl growing up without her father. I'm not asking you to confess it to the town. I'm asking you to tell me. Because if I'm going to be that child's family, I need to know what I'm walking into. He was quiet for a long time. And the sixth, he said finally. The sixth, Elira said, is that you ask me again. He frowned. Ask you what? Ask me to marry you, she said. Properly. Not in front of a store full of people because you panicked. Here, now, just the two of us. She paused. Because if we're doing this, I want there to be one moment that's real. The silence in the store was the longest of the day. Boone Mercer looked at her. really looked at her the way she wasn't sure he'd looked at anyone in years, and she held his gaze and waited. He reached out and picked up the pencil from beside her ledger. He signed the bottom of the paper. Then he set the pencil down, straightened, and said quietly, without performance, without the rawness of that morning, "Elira Voss, will you marry me?" She took the paper, folded it, and put it in her apron pocket. "Yes," she said, "I will." They were married at 6:30 that evening in the parlor of Reverend Abel's house, with Gerald Hatch as the witness, and Clara Moody, who showed up uninvited but brought a cake, so no one argued, standing in the corner with her arms folded and her eyes wet. It lasted 12 minutes. Reverend Abel read the words. Boone said the words. Elira said the words. There was no music, no flowers, no ring. Boone had not thought of a ring, and Elira, looking at his face when he realized this, said quietly that it didn't matter and meant it. When it was done, Reverend Abel shook Boone's hand and patted Elira's and said something about God's plans being mysterious. Clara hugged Elira hard enough to squeeze the breath out of her and whispered in her ear, "If he hurts you, I will make his life a misery." "I know," Elira whispered back. She did not feel like a bride. She felt like a woman who had made a decision, a serious, possibly irreversible decision, for reasons that she understood, but could not entirely explain, and was now standing on the far side of it, looking back at the shore. She had not expected the question she asked him that morning to change the shape of the day. But that was the thing about honest questions. They had a way of changing everything. Boone drove her up to his cabin that night in the dark. The road, if it could be called a road, was a series of decisions more than a path. He knew every turn without the benefit of much light. She sat beside him on the wagon bench with her coat buttoned to her chin and watched the trees close in on either side and thought steadily about Ivy. About a 7-year-old girl on a train. About what it must feel like to be 7 years old and have your whole world collapse and be sent toward a stranger by people who meant well but didn't know you. She had promised herself in the back room of the store that afternoon that she would think about Ivy first, before she thought about Boone's volatility, or the risks of this arrangement, or the fact that she had signed a legal document tying herself to a man she barely knew. Before any of that. Ivy first. "Tell me about Cora," she said. Boone was quiet for a moment. The horse moved steadily through the dark. "We were together for about 8 months, he said finally. "This was 9 years ago, maybe just past. I was working timber camps up near the border moving around. She ran a boarding house. We were—" He stopped. It wasn't a love story. It was two people who were lonely in the same place at the same time. "And she didn't tell you she was pregnant?" "No." His voice was flat, not angry. Flat the way things go flat when they've been thought about so many times that the feeling has been worn out of them. "I don't know if she knew when I moved on. I don't know if she decided not to tell me. I don't know if she tried to find me and couldn't." He paused. "The letter she wrote before she died, she said she hadn't told me because she'd thought she could do it alone. And then she did. For 7 years. Another pause. She said she was sorry. Elira looked at the side of his face in the dark. "Are you angry at her?" she said. "No." Immediate. "I don't know. I'm angry at—" He stopped himself, jaw working. "I missed 7 years of my daughter's life and I didn't even know she existed, and I keep trying to figure out who to be angry at, and I keep coming back to the same place." "Yourself," Elira said. He didn't answer. "Because you left," she said, not accusing, just naming it. "I was good at leaving," he said. "Back then." The cabin appeared in the trees, dark, square, solid, built to last by a man who trusted nothing that he hadn't built himself. She had not known what to expect, and she found herself sitting in the wagon looking at it, reassured by its simplicity. It was a real place, real walls, real roof, real windows. Not what she'd imagined when she heard Mountain Man. "It's bigger than I thought," she said. "I built it to last," he said. They sat with that for a moment. "She's going to hate it," he said quietly. "Ivy. She's going to look at it, and she's 7. She just lost her mother. She's going to look at all of this." He gestured at the dark trees, the mountain, the whole vast silence of the high country, and she's going to be terrified. Yes, Elira said. She probably will be. He looked at her. So we'll have to make it less terrifying, she said. One day at a time. He was quiet. Then gruffly, You really think you can do this? I don't think anything, she said. I decided to do it. That's different. She climbed down from the wagon before he could offer a hand, which she suspected he'd been about to do and hadn't known how to. She walked to the door of the cabin and waited. He came and opened it. Inside was plain. A fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, shelves of supplies. A second room, the bedroom with a door that she noted he kept closed. A narrow cot along the far wall of the main room. She looked at the cot. I built it 3 days ago, he said. When I knew you'd need when I thought, It's fine, she said. He stood in the middle of his own cabin like he didn't quite know how to occupy it now that it had someone else in it. She thought briefly that she understood. She'd been alone a long time herself. Alone had its own shape, its own rhythm. Putting another person in the space didn't automatically fill it the right way. We should sleep, she said. The train comes at 10. He nodded. She sat on the edge of the cot and began unlacing her boots. Elira. She looked up. He was standing near the fireplace, one hand on the mantel, looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Not gratitude. He didn't look like a man who'd had much practice with gratitude. Something underneath it. I know you didn't do this for me, he said. No, she agreed. I didn't, but I want you to know. He stopped. I'm not going to make this harder than it has to be. She looked at him for a long moment. Neither am I, she said. She lay down on the cot and stared at the ceiling, and in the dark cabin in the mountains with a man she'd married 6 hours ago, lying awake on the other side of a wall. She thought about a little girl named Ivy on a train in the dark. Fathers don't leave. She didn't know yet that those were going to be the words. But she felt them coming the way you feel weather before it arrives. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow, everything would begin. She was awake before dawn, not because she hadn't slept. She had for a few hours, the dreamless kind that comes from exhaustion rather than peace. She was awake because the cabin had a particular silence to it that she hadn't expected. Not empty silence. Waiting silence. The kind that gathers in a space right before something arrives that will change it permanently. She lay on the cot and listened to Boone moving in the other room. He was already up. She could hear the low sounds of a man who had lived alone long enough to move through a space without thinking about it. The soft drag of boots on the floor, the click of the wood stove door, the sound of water being poured. He didn't know she was awake, and he wasn't performing anything. He was just a man getting through a morning, and the ordinariness of it, the plain human sound of it steadied her in a way she hadn't expected. She got up and dressed and came through to the main room. He was at the stove. He looked up when she came in, and for a moment neither of them said anything, because this was the first morning, and the first morning of any new thing always carried that particular weight of reality. The moment when what you decided the night before has to be inhabited in daylight. Coffee, he said. It wasn't a question. He poured a second cup without waiting for one. She sat at the table. He set the cup in front of her and sat across from her with his own, and they both looked at the space between them and drank their coffee in silence, which should have been awkward and somehow wasn't. Two people who knew how to be alone understood the particular grammar of shared quiet. We need to talk about today, she said. I know. What time are we leaving? 8. Gives us enough time to get down to the station before the train. She nodded. She wrapped both hands around the cup. What do you know about her beyond what the letter said? Boone was quiet for a moment. The county sent a document. After the letter. Formal thing, her full name, her age, her health record. He stopped. She's small for her age, it said. She doesn't talk much in new situations. She had a teacher who wrote something, a note attached to the document saying Ivy was one of the smartest children she'd taught, but that she kept herself to herself. Didn't trust easily. He paused again. The teacher wrote that Ivy had been her mother's caretaker for the last 4 months, while Cora was sick. Elira was very still. "She's 7 years old," she said quietly. "Yes. And she was taking care of her dying mother." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She could see what it cost him to hold that the image of a child he'd never met, carrying something no child should carry, and not be able to go back and fix any of it. "Boone," she said. He looked at her. "She's going to look at you and feel everything she wasn't allowed to feel while she was busy being strong," Elira said. "That's what children do. They hold themselves together until they find someone they think can bear the weight, and then they fall apart." "She doesn't know me," he said. "Why would she fall apart with me?" "Because you're her father," Elira said. "She doesn't need to know you. She's known what you are her whole life." He looked down at his cup. "And when she falls apart," Elira said, "you don't fix it. You don't explain it. You don't back away from it. You just stay." He was quiet for a long time. "I'm not good at staying." "I know," she said. "You told me." "I'm trying to be different." "I know that too." She stood up and took her cup to the shelf. "That's why I'm here." The wagon ride down the mountain was quiet and fast. He drove the way he did everything with a kind of compressed intensity, like a man who had decided something and was now executing it, no second guessing permitted. She sat beside him and thought about the platform and what it would look like when a 7-year-old girl stepped off a train and saw Boone Mercer for the first time. She thought this child has been picturing this moment for weeks, maybe longer. Children who grow up without a parent. Construct, elaborate versions of them. Part dream, part accusation, part desperate hope. Whatever Ivy had imagined her father to be, the reality of him was going to arrive all at once, and it was going to be too much and not enough simultaneously, and there was nothing either of them could do to soften that. The platform was already busy when they arrived. A few families waiting for the train. A man with freight documents talking to the station master. Boone pulled up and tied the horse, and they walked to the platform together and stood side by side, and she was aware of the looks they received. Boone Mercer on a train platform was unusual enough. Boone Mercer standing beside a woman was an event. She did not look at the people looking at them. She kept her eyes on the far end of the track. "Stop," she said quietly. He looked at her. "You're about to pace," she said. "Don't." His jaw tightened, but he stayed still. She could feel the tension coming off him like heat. She understood it. She felt it herself, a kind of coiled alertness, the body preparing for something the mind couldn't fully predict. But Ivy was going to step off that train, and the first thing she needed to see was stillness, steadiness, not a man who looked like he might fly apart. "Breathe," Elira said. "I'm breathing." "Breathe differently," she said. He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had been under better circumstances. But she saw his shoulders drop by half an inch, which was close enough. The train came in. She felt him go rigid beside her. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the doors as they opened on the passengers stepping off. One by one, a woman with packages, 2 men in work coats, an older couple with a dog, and then the conductor stepped down and turned back and reached up a hand, and a small hand took it, and Ivy Mercer stepped onto the platform. She was small. The document had said so, but documents didn't prepare you for the reality of a child standing in an adult world, carrying a bag that was almost as big as she was, wearing a coat that had been carefully buttoned all the way to the top with dark hair pulled back in 2 braids that someone, Cora, or maybe a neighbor, some kind woman who understood that the last thing you could give a child on a day like this was the dignity of neat braids, had done with obvious care. She had Boone's eyes. That was the first thing. Dark, precise, and watchful, taking in everything at once without appearing to. She stood on the platform and scanned it with the efficiency of a child who had learned very early that environments needed to be assessed before they could be trusted. Her gaze moved across the platform, past Elira, past Boone, moved on, then came back. She looked at Boone for a long moment. She said nothing. Boone took 1 step forward. Just one. Then he stopped himself like a man who had planned to do something and then realized mid-motion that he didn't know how. "Ivy," he said. Her chin came up. just slightly. "I'm Boone," he said. "I'm—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I'm your father." The word landed in the air between them and hung there. Ivy looked at him. Her expression was not what Elira had expected. She had braced for tears, for anger, for the kind of theatrical grief that children sometimes deploy when they're overwhelmed. Instead, what she saw on that small face was something far more unnerving. Assessment. Pure, cold, careful assessment. The look of a child who had been disappointed enough times to stop feeling the disappointment and start measuring the probability. "My mother said you didn't know about me," Ivy said. Her voice was even. Not flat. There was feeling in it, carefully managed the way you manage something you can't afford to spill. "That's right," Boone said. "She said it wasn't your fault." "She was being generous," he said. Ivy looked at him for another long moment. "She was always generous," she said. And something moved across her face just for a second, a ripple of grief so large it was almost visible as a physical thing, and then it was gone, sealed back under the surface. "Are you her?" Ivy said then, and Elira realized the girl was looking at her. "I'm Elira," she said. She didn't offer more than that. "He said he had a wife," Ivy said. "He does." "Are you kind?" Ivy asked. The question arrived like a stone dropped in still water. Clean, direct, devastating in its simplicity. The question of a child who had asked it before and received answers that turned out to be wrong and had decided to keep asking anyway, because what else could you do? Elira looked at her steadily. "I try to be," she said. "I don't always get it right, but I try." Ivy considered this. Apparently, she had some framework for evaluating this kind of answer, because after a moment, she nodded once small, as though she'd filed it away. She picked up her bag. "Fathers don't leave," she said. She was looking at Boone when she said it. Not accusing, stating. The way you state a rule you've learned and are presenting for confirmation. Boone looked like he'd been struck. His entire face changed, the set of his jaw, the angle of his shoulders, all of it shifted, and she saw something move through him that was too big and too complicated for the public space of a train platform. "I'm not leaving," he said. His voice was rough. "I'm not going anywhere." Ivy studied him. "My mother said that people mean it when they say it," she said quietly. "They just don't always stay meaning it." He got down on one knee. It was not a graceful movement. He was a big man, and the platform was hard, and it looked like it cost him something, not physically. The other way. The way it costs a proud person to make themselves small. He was at her eye level now. "I know I can't prove it to you right now," he said. "I know I don't have anything to show you. I just got the same letter you got 3 weeks ago, and everything I thought I knew about my life changed. And I know that's not—" He stopped. "I know that's not your problem. That's mine. But I need you to know that I'm going to spend however long it takes proving it to you, and if you never believe me, that's your right, but I'm not going to stop trying." Ivy looked at him. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes that wasn't assessment. Not trust, she was too careful for that, but something. A small unlocking. "Okay," she said. She did not smile. She did not reach for him. But she said okay, and Elira understood that in Ivy's particular language, okay was enormous. The county man arrived on the same train. Elira had forgotten, or perhaps put out of her mind, that the legal determination wouldn't happen in some distant courthouse weeks from now. It was happening here. Today. His name was Mr. Thorne, and he was a narrow man in a gray coat who carried a leather case and looked at Boone Mercer the way people look at things they expect to be problems. He shook hands with Boone with the brisk efficiency of a man who had done this many times. He shook hands with Elira and held her hand slightly too long in the appraising way of someone trying to read a situation through physical contact. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. "Mr. Thorne," she said. His eyes moved to Ivy, who was standing beside Elira, now not holding her hand, not close enough to be touching, but positioned in a way that was clearly deliberate. Close to the woman, not to the man, Thorne noticed. His eyes came back to Boone. "I'll need to speak with you privately," he said. "And with the child." "Of course," Boone said. "And with your wife." He said, his gaze moving to Elira. Whenever you're ready, she said. They went to the station master's office. Ivy sat on a bench outside with her bag on her lap and watched the conversation through the window with dark, careful eyes, and Elira sat across from Thorn and answered his questions with the same composed directness she applied to everything. How long had they been married? Since yesterday evening. Did she understand the nature of the arrangement, that it had been entered into quickly with the child situation as the precipitating factor? Yes, she understood that. Did she feel any? Thorn paused here, choosing his word. Any coercion had been involved. She looked at him. Mr. Thorn, she said, I am a woman who has run a business alone for 4 years in a mountain town where most people didn't think I could manage it. I don't get coerced. I make decisions. Thorn wrote something in his notebook. And this decision, he said, you stand by it. I'm sitting here, aren't I? She said. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted just slightly. Not softening exactly. Recalibrating. The child is quiet, he said. She's been quiet since the letter was sent. The social worker in Billings noted it. Said she'd been talkative before her mother's illness changed her. She's 7, and she just lost her mother, Elira said. Quiet seems like a reasonable response. Some children withdraw permanently after trauma like this, Thorn said. The question is environment, whether the environment can support recovery. Then I suggest, Elira said, that you stop interviewing the adults and spend some time with Ivy. He blinked. She's the one you're trying to protect, Elira said. Ask her what she needs. She's old enough to know. Thorn spoke to Ivy alone for 20 minutes. Boone stood outside the office door, like a man waiting for a verdict on everything that mattered. He didn't pace. Elira had told him not to pace. But she could see the control it required, the tight stillness of a man holding himself in place through sheer force of will. She stood beside him. What if he says no? Boone said. Not loudly, almost to himself. He's not going to say no, Elira said. You don't know that. No, she said. But Ivy is going to tell him what she wants. He looked at her. You think she knows what she wants? She knew enough to ask me if I was kind, Elira said. She's been thinking about this for weeks. She knows exactly what she wants. He was quiet. What if what she wants is to go back to someone she already knows, someone in Billings who... Boone. Elira waited until he looked at her. Stop catastrophizing and trust her. He held her gaze for a moment. You're not afraid of anything, are you? I'm afraid of plenty, she said. I'm just not afraid of this particular moment. The door opened. Thorn came out. Ivy came with him, her bag still over her shoulder, her expression still carefully managed. But her eyes went immediately to Boone, and then to Elira, and then she did something that none of them had expected. She walked past Thorn and stood beside Elira. Not in front of, not behind, beside. The way you stand beside something you've decided belongs to you. Thorn looked at the three of them. The big quiet man, the composed woman, the small dark-eyed girl who had positioned herself between them with the decisive authority of someone who had made a choice and wasn't going to be argued out of it. He closed his notebook. I'll file my preliminary report this week, he said. I'll be back in 90 days for a follow-up evaluation. He looked at Boone directly. Do not give me a reason to intervene before then. You won't need to, Boone said. Thorn picked up his case. See to it. He looked at Elira once more, and there was something in his expression that was almost respect. Mrs. Mercer, he said. Safe travels, Mr. Thorn, she said. He walked back toward the platform to catch the return train. The three of them stood together in the station master's doorway, and the town of Redemption Ridge went on around them. Horses and voices, and the ordinary noise of a morning, while something that had no name, yet took its first breath. Ivy looked up at Boone. He looked down at her. Is it far? She said. The cabin. About an hour, he said. Is it cold? It's warm inside. I keep the fire going. She seemed to consider this. My mother said mountain men were rough, she said. He blinked. She wasn't wrong. She said rough didn't always mean bad. His throat moved. She wasn't wrong about that either, he managed. Ivy nodded. She shifted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. Can I sit in the front of the wagon? She asked. Yes, Boone said. He said it too fast, and she noticed, and something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but the place where a smile might eventually live. Okay, she said. Elira reached down and took the bag from Ivy's shoulder before the girl could protest and settled it under her own arm without comment, and they walked together to the wagon. This man who had never stayed anywhere, this woman who had stayed too long in one place, and this child who was the reason that any of it mattered. And the morning opened up around them cold and clear, full of everything that hadn't happened yet. The ride back up the mountain was different from every other ride Boone had made on that road. I was aware of it immediately. The weight of the wagon was the same. The horse moved, the same. The cold came off the trees, the same way it always did. But everything felt different, because there was a child sitting between him and Elira on the wagon bench. A child who asked no questions and made no complaints, and sat with her small hands folded in her lap, and watched the trees go by with those dark measuring eyes, and the silence she carried was not the silence of a child who had nothing to say. It was the silence of a child who had decided not to say it yet. Boone kept both hands on the reins and said nothing because he couldn't think of a single thing that was worth saying. Everything he considered felt wrong, too cheerful, too heavy, too much like a man trying to perform a feeling he hadn't actually earned yet. Elira was the one who spoke first. "Have you ever seen snow?" she asked Ivy. Ivy looked at her. "Yes. Real snow, mountain snow." "I don't know the difference," Ivy said. "You will," Elira said. "It's heavier, it comes faster. When it comes down in the high country, you can hear it." Ivy was quiet for a moment. "You can hear snow. When it's thick enough, it makes a sound like someone laying a heavy blanket over everything at once." Ivy considered this. "That sounds nice," she said finally, with the careful voice of a child who had learned to qualify everything to leave herself room to take it back. "It is," Elira said. "Most of the time." Boone said nothing. But something in his chest loosened by a fraction, and he was grateful for it. When they got to the cabin, Ivy stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the inside, the way she'd looked at the platform, cataloging, assessing, checking exits that weren't exits, measuring the space against some internal standard that no one else had access to. Then she walked in and set her bag on the floor beside the cot, which had been made up clean, and turned around. "Is this mine?" she said. She was looking at the cot. "Yes," Boone said. "Did you make it for me?" He hesitated. "Yes." She looked at the cot for another moment. "Okay," she said. It was the same okay from the platform, the one that meant more than it sounded like. The first 3 days were a study in careful navigation. Ivy ate what was put in front of her without complaint and without enthusiasm. She slept long hours and did not make noise during the night, which Elira found more unsettling than crying would have been a child. That quiet in her sleep was the child who had learned that even distress needed to be managed. She helped with small tasks when asked, carrying wood in from the porch, stirring something on the stove, with the particular diligence of a child who understood that helpfulness was a form of safety. If you were useful, people kept you. Boone watched all of this and said very little. Elira watched him watching and understood what it was doing to him. Every small, careful thing Ivy did was a window into 7 years. He hadn't been there for 7 years of this child, learning to need very little and ask for nothing, and he was seeing all of it compressed into 3 days, and it was wrecking him in a way that he couldn't speak about and wouldn't cry about, and so was simply carrying silently, like all the other things he'd decided to carry alone. On the 4th morning, Boone came in from outside with a piece of wood in his hand and a small knife, and he sat down at the table and began to carve. Ivy was across the room. She looked up from the book Elira had given her, a simple one illustrated, and watched him. He didn't say anything. He just carved. She watched for 10 minutes, which was a long time for a child to watch anything in silence. Then she got up and came to the table and stood beside his elbow. "What is that?" she asked. "Don't know yet," he said. She frowned. You don't know what you're making. I start and see what comes out. He turned the piece over. Sometimes it's a horse. Sometimes it's a bird. Sometimes it's just a shape. She looked at the wood. What do you do with it when it's done? Depends. Keep it sometimes. Give it away sometimes. She was quiet. Who do you give it to? He paused his carving for just a moment. Whoever needs something to hold on to, he said. She stared at the piece of wood. Can I watch? She asked. You're already watching, he said. And that was how it started, not with a declaration or an apology or a carefully planned moment, but with a man and a knife and a piece of wood and a child who decided that watching was acceptable, which for Ivy was nearly the same thing as trust. But trust did not arrive in a straight line. On the 6th day, Elira was outside the cabin splitting kindling she'd insisted on helping with outdoor tasks, despite Boone's initial resistance, and he'd given up arguing about it when she heard Ivy's voice from inside, louder than she'd heard it since the platform. Don't touch my bag. She came in through the door quickly. Boone was standing in the middle of the room. He had the bag in his hand. Ivy's worn travel bag, and his expression said clearly that he'd only picked it up because it was in the way of something, and he had not anticipated this. Ivy was on her feet 3 feet away from him, with her hands balled at her sides. Put it down, she said. Her voice was controlled, but her eyes were not. Her eyes were the eyes of a child who had had too many things taken. Ivy, Boone said. I wasn't going to. Put it down, she said again. He put it down, carefully, set it exactly where he'd picked it up from. Ivy walked over and picked it up herself and carried it to the cot and sat with it in her lap. Nobody spoke for a moment. What's in the bag? Elira asked quietly. Ivy's arms tightened around it. Ivy, Elira said, and she kept her voice the same way she'd kept it in the store when Boone first walked in, steady, no alarm, no drama. No one is going to take it from you. People say that, Ivy said. I know they do. And then they take things anyway, because they think they know better. Elira walked across the room and sat on the edge of the cot, not close enough to crowd her. What's in there that matters that much? A long pause. Then Ivy reached into the bag and pulled out a small tin, the kind that used to hold buttons or thread, and held it for a moment. Then she opened it. Inside was a photograph folded in half. 2 small river stones that were slightly different shades of brown. A piece of ribbon faded yellow. A lock of hair tied with a piece of string. Ivy looked down at these things with an expression that Elira recognized as the face a person makes when they are not going to cry about something that deserves a great deal of crying. My mother's, she said. Everything that was hers that was small enough. Boone had not moved from the middle of the room, but Elira heard him breathe a single sharp intake controlled stopped. That's yours, Elira said. It stays with you, always. No one touches it. You promise, Ivy said. Yes, Elira said. Not immediately, she let the word arrive with weight the way a promise should. I promise. Ivy looked at her. She looked at the tin. She closed it carefully and put it back in the bag and held the bag in her lap. Then she looked at Boone. She kept your photograph, Ivy said. In her dresser, not in the tin, in the dresser. She paused. I don't know why she kept it separate. She never said. Boone's jaw worked. He didn't answer. Maybe she thought you'd come back, Ivy said. Not unkindly, just saying the thing that was there. Maybe, he said. His voice was very rough. Ivy looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Elira. Then she lay down on the cot with the bag against her chest and faced the wall, which meant she was done talking. Which meant she'd said all she was going to say for now. Which meant she needed everyone to leave her alone with it, the way you leave someone alone, with something too large to look at directly. Elira stood up quietly and went back outside. Boone followed her. He got about 6 feet from the cabin door and stopped and put his hand against the wall and stood there with his head down, not moving. She gave him a minute. She kept my photograph, he said. It wasn't directed at Elira. It wasn't directed at anyone. Yes, Elira said. Cora kept for 7 years. He stopped. Yes. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't. That doesn't make it. He stopped again. His hand pressed against the wall. No, Elira said. It doesn't make it anything except what it is. A woman who loved you enough to keep your picture, and a daughter who grew up knowing your face without knowing you. She paused. That's a lot to carry. He turned around. His face was not broken. Men like Boone didn't break in ways you could see from the outside, not easily, but there was something in him that had shifted off its foundation. Something fundamental. I don't know how to do this, he said. Not the general this of being a husband or building a family, the specific this. I don't know how to be what she needs. What do you think she needs? Elira asked. He was quiet. Someone who doesn't leave. Then be that, Elira said. That's it. That's the whole thing. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to say the right words. You just have to be there when she wakes up, and there when she goes to sleep, and there for every hard moment in between. She looked at him steadily. Can you do that? He held her gaze for a long moment. Yes, he said. Then you already know how to do this, she said. You're just afraid you don't. Weeks passed. The rhythm of the cabin changed slowly. The way water changes stone. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in the accumulated weight of small moments. Boone carved in the evenings, and Ivy watched, and then one evening she asked if she could try, and he gave her a piece of soft wood and a small dull knife, and guided her hand once without saying anything, and then let her go, and she sat beside him at the table for an hour, making something that was not any recognizable shape, but was absolutely and completely hers. Elira read to her at night. Not children's stories, she'd tried those first, and Ivy had listened politely, but with the expression of a child who had moved past them. She moved to books about animals, then history. Then one evening she started reading aloud from a book about the constellations, and Ivy had sat up in the cot and said, "Wait, go back," with the first real urgency Elira had heard in her voice, and they went back and read that page 3 times before Ivy was satisfied. After that, stars were the language between them. Elira taught her their names, their stories, the old myths attached to them, and Ivy collected these facts like the river stones in her tin carefully, with the understanding that once you had them, no one could take them from you. Boone started coming outside with them on clear nights. He didn't know the names. He learned them from listening. He never asked Elira to teach him directly, he just stood there while she taught Ivy, and after a while he knew them too, and one night Ivy pointed at a cluster overhead and looked at him and said, "Do you know that one?" And he said, "Pleiades." And she stared at him with something that might from a distance have looked like approval. But underneath all of it, underneath the carvings and the stars and the kitchen sounds and the small, ordinary vocabulary of a household, finding its shape, there was something unresolved. Something that Elira felt the way you feel a change in weather before it comes. A pressure building. It arrived on a Tuesday 3 weeks after Ivy came. It arrived because Boone came in from outside with a set to his jaw that she recognized, not anger exactly, but the thing that lived next door to anger. The thing that happened when a man who had spent years managing himself alone suddenly couldn't find the valve. He'd been to the nearest neighbor, a man named Colby, who had a property 2 miles east to trade some timber work for supplies. She didn't know what had been said, but whatever it was had come back with him in his shoulders and his jaw, and the way he set down the supply crate on the table harder than necessary. Ivy looked up from her book. Boone caught himself, but too late. Ivy had already seen it. "Are you angry?" she asked. He stopped. "No." "You look angry." "I'm not angry." He turned toward the wood stove. "My mother's voice got like that when she was angry," Ivy said, not loudly, just clearly. Low and flat. He turned back. "Ivy." "She used to say she wasn't angry either," Ivy said. "And then later she would tell me she was sorry for being angry." He stared at her. "I am not your mother." "I know," Ivy said. "And I'm not angry at you." "Who are you angry at?" The question sat in the room. Boone looked at her, this small child who had folded her book closed and was looking at him with those dark eyes that saw things he wasn't offering, and he didn't have an answer. Or rather, he had an answer, and it was the same answer it always was, and he was tired of its weight. Colby said something, he said finally. Not to her exactly, to the room. About me, Ivy said. He was quiet for a moment. About the situation. What about it? He shook his head. What did he say? Ivy pressed. He said, Boone stopped. His jaw worked. He said it was a peculiar thing that a man in my position needed to go get a wife to keep his daughter. He said, another stop. He said some people in town were wondering if the marriage was real. The room was quiet. Is it real? Ivy asked. She was looking at Elira now. Elira looked back at her evenly. What do you think? She said. Ivy thought about this. You're both here, she said. Every day, you're both here. Yes, Elira said. That seems real, Ivy said. Boone made a sound. It wasn't exactly a laugh. It was the sound a man makes when something surprises him into almost one. It's real enough, Elira said to Ivy. Don't worry about what people in town say. I don't, Ivy said. She picked her book back up. Then she looked at Boone. You should stop being almost angry. It makes your face look like a fist. Boone blinked. Elira looked at the ceiling. Like a fist, he repeated. Yes, Ivy said, and went back to her book. He stood there for a moment. Then he sat down at the table. He reached for his carving wood and his knife, and he began to carve, and within 10 minutes his shoulders had dropped, and his jaw had unlocked, and his face, as Ivy had put it, had stopped looking like a fist. Elira caught Ivy watching him from behind the edge of her book. Just watching quietly with those careful eyes. Keeping track, Elira thought. Keeping track of whether he stays angry or lets it go. Of whether he does what he said he would do. She was testing him. Not cruelly, not consciously maybe. But she was testing him the way a child tests every adult who claims to be trustworthy by watching what they do when no one is asking them to be good. He passed. He didn't know he was being tested, but he passed. 3 weeks later, Elira found the carved figure on her pillow. It was small, the size of her palm, and it took her a moment to understand what it was. A woman standing. Not stylized or decorated, just a simple, honest shape. But there was something in the angle of it, the set of the shoulders, the way the head was positioned, that she recognized with a jolt she hadn't expected. It was her. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a long moment holding it. She didn't know if Boone had made it or Ivy had. And then she heard Ivy's voice from the main room reading aloud from the constellation book to herself, the way she did sometimes, and she understood that it had been Boone. She put it on the shelf beside her bed. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at it for a while. She was not a woman who cried easily. She had spent years making sure of that. But she felt, sitting there in the late afternoon quiet of the cabin bedroom, something shift in the architecture of what she'd thought this was. What she'd told herself, it was a practical arrangement, a decision made for good reasons, a temporary structure until the situation stabilized. She picked up the small carved figure and turned it in her hands. The weight of it was nothing. The weight of it was everything. Outside she could hear Ivy reading, and Boone moving around the main room, doing whatever he did in the evenings, and the sounds of them together were ordinary and unperformed. And Elira sat with the small carved woman in her hands and thought about what it meant that a man who didn't say things had said this. She set it back on the shelf. She went back out into the main room. Boone was at the table. He didn't look up when she came in. He kept his eyes on whatever he was working on. She sat down across from him. She folded her hands on the table. "Thank you," she said. He looked up. His expression was careful, the expression of a man who had done something and wasn't sure how it would land. "It's not," he started. It is," she said. "Thank you." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, the way he agreed to things that mattered more than he could say, and looked back down at his work. Ivy turned a page and kept reading, and the cabin in the mountains held all three of them in its particular quiet, the one that wasn't empty anymore, the one that had learned slowly and without announcement, to feel like something other than the silence before a storm. The carved woman stayed on Elira's shelf. She noticed that Ivy had seen it. The girl had a way of cataloging every object in the cabin with her eyes quietly, the way she did everything quietly. And one morning, Elira caught her standing in the bedroom doorway, looking at the shelf with an expression that was hard to read. Not jealousy. Something more complicated than that. The look of a child who is trying to understand what category a thing belongs to. "He made one for me too," Ivy said without being asked. "I know," Elira said. "A horse." Ivy paused. "I didn't ask for a horse." "What would you have asked for?" Ivy thought about it. "A bird," she said. "Something that can leave if it wants to, but doesn't have to." Elira looked at her for a moment. "Tell him that," she said. Ivy shrugged, which meant she'd consider it, which with Ivy meant she'd almost certainly do it when she was ready, and not a moment before. That was the thing about Ivy that Elira had come to understand in the weeks since she'd arrived. She was not a child who could be rushed. She had a pace that was entirely her own, and it was deliberate, and it was careful, and it was the product of 7 years of learning that the world moved faster than she could trust. So she had simply decided to move at her own speed, and let the world catch up or not. Most adults found this unsettling. Elira found it one of the most recognizable things about her. She recognized it because she had done the same thing herself once after her own particular loss. The one she had not told Boone about yet. The one she had carried into this arrangement, the way Ivy carried her tin, close, private, not secret exactly, but not offered either. It was Boone who broke it open. Not intentionally. He never did anything that mattered intentionally. All the real things happened sideways through carving and silence, and the particular way he moved through the cabin when he thought no one was watching him. Be careful. It was a Tuesday evening about 6 weeks after Ivy arrived. Elira was at the table with the store ledger. She'd had Gerald Hatch bring it up on his weekly supply run, because the business didn't stop just because her life had changed shape and Ivy was asleep or close to it on the cot. Boone came in from outside and stood by the stove warming his hands and looked at her and said without preamble, the way he said all things, "You said you failed a child once." She looked up from the ledger. "Before," he said. "At the store. You said you'd failed a child once and you weren't going to do it again. I've been waiting for you to tell me." She set the pencil down. She had known this was coming. She had been waiting for it too, though she'd told herself she was in no hurry. The truth was that the closer this cabin came to feeling like something real, the heavier the not telling had gotten. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She folded her hands on the ledger. "I was married before," she said. "Before I came to Redemption Ridge. I was 23. His name was Daniel Voss. I kept the name because starting over required at least one thing that was already mine." She paused. "We had a daughter. She was born in the spring. She lived for 4 days." The stove ticked quietly. "Daniel left 6 months after," she said. "Not cruelly. He came apart, and he couldn't put himself back together while he was near me because I reminded him of what we'd lost. I understood that. I didn't forgive it for a long time, but I understood it." She paused again. "I came here because I needed to be somewhere that didn't already know me. Somewhere I could be just Elira Voss who runs the store, not Elira Voss who buried her daughter." Boone was very still. "The child I failed," she said quietly, "was her. I know that's not. I know she was only 4 days old. I know there was nothing I could have done. But the body doesn't know logic. The body just knows that something that was supposed to live didn't, and you were the one holding it." She stopped. "So when you told me there was a 7-year-old girl coming on a train who might end up in a state home, I knew. I knew exactly what I was going to say before I even had time to think about it. Because I was not going to be the person who failed another child." Boone didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," she said. "I'm not telling you so you'll be sorry. I'm telling you because you asked and because you had the right to know what you married." "What I married," he said slowly, "is a woman with more courage than anyone else in that town." She looked at him. "It's not courage," she said. It's just not having anything left to lose makes the hard decisions easier. You had the store, he said. The store isn't the same as a life, she said. He held her gaze. It is now, he said. Isn't it? She didn't answer. But she didn't look away either, which was its own kind of answer. She did not expect that the night would bring what it brought. She had gone to bed her side of the arrangement. The bedroom. The carved figure on the shelf. And she had lain awake for a while, the way she often did. Listening to the cabin settle. Listening to Ivy's breathing from the other room. Listening to Boone add wood to the stove at some point past midnight. The ordinary sounds of a house that had learned its people. Then Ivy screamed, not the wordless kind of scream that comes from nightmares. Elira had heard those small choked sounds in the first week that broke her heart every time. This was sharp and clear and terrified a child's scream with a word in it, Mama. Elira was out of bed and through the door before she'd made any conscious decision to move. Ivy was sitting upright on the cot, both hands pressed flat against the mattress, eyes open and absolutely unseeing her chest, heaving. The look on her face was the look of a child who had been somewhere else and been pulled back violently and couldn't yet find the edges of where she was. Boone was already there. He'd gotten there first, which told her he'd been awake. He was crouched in front of the cot with his hands raised slightly, not touching, not knowing if he should, his face stripped of everything except a kind of desperate, uncertain care. Ivy, he was saying. Ivy, you're here. You're in the cabin. She wasn't hearing him. Her eyes were moving through him. Elira came and sat on the edge of the cot and reached out and took one of Ivy's hands firmly, not gently, because gentle was what you did with someone fragile. And Ivy was not fragile. She was overwhelmed and overwhelmed. People needed something solid and held it. Ivy, she said, clear and even. It's Elira. You're in the cabin. It's the middle of the night and you had a bad dream. Something shifted in Ivy's eyes. The focus came back in stages. There you are, Elira said. Ivy looked at her. Then she looked at Boone, still crouched in front of her with his face open in a way Elira had never seen it. Then Ivy crumpled. It wasn't a slow thing. It was fast, the way structural failures are fast. The thing holds, and then it simply doesn't anymore. She bent forward and pressed her face against her own knees and made a sound that was not quite crying, but was the thing that lives underneath, crying the thing that crying is trying to get to. Boone moved. He moved without thinking the way you move when your body has made a decision before your mind catches up. He sat on the cot beside her and put his arms around her, not tentative, not careful, just around her solid like a wall, and held on. She didn't pull away. She cried. She cried the way a child cries who has been not crying for a very long time, all of it at once without management, without the careful surface she maintained during daylight hours. She cried for her mother and for the train, and for the 4 days in Billings between Cora dying and the county man arriving, and for every night she'd held herself together because there was no one there who could bear the weight. Boone held her and didn't say anything. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't tell her it was going to be all right. He just stayed, his arms around her, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the middle distance with an expression that Elira could only describe as a man receiving something he knew he didn't deserve, and refusing to put it down anyway. Elira sat beside them both and kept her hand on Ivy's back. The three of them stayed like that for a long time. When it was over, when Ivy had gone quiet and her breathing had slowed and the storm had passed, she didn't move away from Boone. She just stayed where she was, leaned against his side, exhausted down to the bone. I dream about her voice, Ivy said finally. Very quiet. Almost no voice left in it. I can't always remember what she looked like anymore, but I can still hear her voice. Boone swallowed hard. What did it sound like? He said. Ivy was quiet for a moment. Like something warm, she said. Like the way this cabin sounds when the fire is going and everyone's inside. Boone's hand moved. He pressed it against the top of her head just once, just briefly, so careful it barely counted, and then he was still again. I'll remember that, he said. Ivy closed her eyes. She was asleep in under 5 minutes, still leaning against him. He looked at Elira over the top of her head. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say. Some moments are too full for words, and this was one of them. A man holding his daughter for the first time in the dark, while the child slept against him with the unguarded trust of the completely exhausted, and the woman across from them who had come into this by choice, and was only now beginning to understand what that choice had actually been. After they'd settled Ivy back under the blankets and moved to the main room, Boone sat at the table and put his face in his hands. Elira sat across from him. "She said it," he said. "She said the cabin sounds like her mother." "Yes," Elira said. I want to be angry about that I can't be what her mother was, that I'm just the place that accidentally sounds like her mother, and instead I'm just—" He stopped. "I'm grateful. That's all I am. I'm just grateful she said it." "That's the right thing to feel," Elira said. "She let me hold her," he said. It came out rough, bewildered, the voice of a man who had been granted something he hadn't thought he'd be given. "She did," Elira said. "Why?" he said. "I haven't done anything. I haven't. I've carved some wood, and I've been here, and that shouldn't be enough to earn—" "Boone," Elira said. He stopped. "You have been here. Every day. Without fail. When she tested you, you didn't flinch. When she was silent, you didn't demand. When she needed to be angry at someone, you gave her somewhere to aim it, and you stayed standing." She paused. "You think that's not enough? She's been measuring you since the platform, every single day, and you have passed every single test she's put in front of you without even knowing you were being tested. That's why she let you hold her, because she's decided." He looked at her. "Decided what?" he said. "That you're staying," Elira said. "She's decided you're staying." Something in his face shifted. Something deep and foundational. The kind of shift that doesn't make noise and doesn't announce itself, but changes the whole structure of a man. "She told me about the bird," he said after a moment. Elira looked up. "What bird?" "She came to me this afternoon while you were doing the books. Said she didn't want the horse. Said she wanted a bird." He paused. "Said she wanted something that could leave if it wanted to, but didn't have to." Elira felt something catch in her chest. "I'm already halfway through it," he said. "I started it tonight before." He nodded toward the cot. "She'll love it," Elira said. "She might not show it," he said. "She'll love it," Elira said again. "She just won't show it in a way you'll recognize." He almost smiled. "Like someone else I know," he said. She looked at him. He was looking back at her, and his expression had that quality. It got sometimes the same quality as the carved figure on her shelf. Something that wasn't said out loud, but was said very clearly nonetheless. She was about to answer when they heard it. From outside, from up toward the ridge, a sound neither of them could place at first, a low carrying sound that wasn't wind and wasn't animal. Boone was on his feet immediately. He went to the door and opened it and stood listening. Elira came to stand beside him. The sound came again, and this time she knew it. She had heard that sound in other mountain towns years ago in a different life. It was a bell. A ranch bell, the kind ranchers use to signal emergency. "That's Colby's," Boone said. She felt him change beside her. The domestic quiet of him replaced instantly with something older. Harder, the part of him that had survived alone in the mountains for 6 years, and knew the difference between problems that could wait and problems that couldn't. "Go," she said. He was already pulling on his coat. "Ivy," he started. "I'll stay with Ivy," she said. "Go." He looked at her for just a moment, a look that was fast and complete, the look of a man checking to make sure the thing he's leaving is safe before he moves, and then he was gone into the dark. She closed the door. She went to the cot where Ivy slept, and she pulled the extra blanket up over her, and she sat in the chair beside her and listened to the wind and waited. She didn't know yet what the bell was for. She didn't know yet that Colby had found 2 men on his property that night. Men who had come over the ridge from the north with a paper in one hand and a county seal on it. Men who had been sent not by Thorne, but by someone else entirely. Someone who had filed a competing claim on Ivy's custody. Someone whose name Elira had never heard, but whose existence was about to change everything they'd built. She didn't know any of that yet. She sat beside Ivy and listened to the darkness and felt in the particular way she'd been feeling things since the morning Boone walked into her store, that the space ahead was not clear, that something was coming that none of them had prepared for. Ivy shifted in her sleep. Her hand moved and found the edge of Elira's sleeve and held it loosely the way you hold something in sleep without knowing you're doing it. Elira looked down at those small fingers curled around her sleeve. She did not move away. She sat very still and let herself be held by a sleeping child who didn't know she was doing it, and thought about what it meant to stay when the ground was shifting under you. She was still sitting there when Boone came back at first light, bringing with him the news that neither of them had wanted and both of them were going to have to face. He came through the door. He looked at her. His face told her everything before he said a word. "Who?" she said quietly, so as not to wake Ivy. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and set it on the table. She looked at it. A name she didn't know. A claim she hadn't anticipated. A thread that had been waiting in the dark of Ivy's past, and had now pulled by someone with both a legal right and a motive she didn't yet understand, begun to unravel everything. "Cora's brother," Boone said. "He's petitioned the county. He wants Ivy." The sleeping child's fingers were still curled around the edge of Elira's sleeve. "He can't have her," Elira said. Her voice did not shake. It was the same voice she'd used in the store when Clara told her Boone was dangerous. The same voice she'd used when Thorne tried to read her through a handshake, the same voice she'd used every time the world had told her that she was not enough for what was needed. Steady. Decided. Final. "He can't have her," she said again. And Boone looked at her across the table, across the paper, and the early light, and the sleeping child between them, and said, "No, he can't." Show more. 1555. The paper sat on the table all morning. Ivy woke up and ate breakfast and did not ask about it, which meant she had seen it and decided not to ask, which was worse. She had that quality, the ability to register something important and file it away and wait the way. An animal goes still when it senses something in the air that it hasn't yet identified. She ate her oats and read her constellation book and said nothing, but her eyes moved to the paper twice, and Elira saw both times. Boone sat across from Elira after Ivy had gone to sit near the window with her book, and he spoke in a voice low enough not to carry. "His name is Roy Dales," he said. "Cora's younger brother. He's in Billings. The county got a petition from him 4 days after Ivy left on the train. He says he's blood family. He says he has a home and a wife and 2 children already, and that Ivy belongs with people who knew her mother." Elira looked at the paper. Did he know Ivy before? The document says he visited twice. She was 3 the last time. "So he doesn't know her," Elira said. "The law doesn't require that he know her," Boone said. "The law looks at blood, at stability, at what's established." He paused. "He has a wife, a real marriage, years of it, children, a house in a town." He stopped again. "And what we have is 60 days old and started on a deadline." She looked at him directly. "Do you believe that what we have is less than what he's offering her?" He met her eyes. "What I believe doesn't determine what a judge decides." "No," she said. "But it determines how we fight." He was quiet for a moment. "Thorne is coming in 30 days. That was always the plan, his 90-day evaluation. But this petition changes the shape of it. Roy Dales has filed for an emergency hearing. His lawyer says the situation here is unstable, that the marriage was entered into under duress." "It wasn't entered into under duress," Elira said. "I know that. I made a decision," she said. "A clear one, with a signed document and 6 conditions, and a reverend and a witness, and Clara Moody in the corner crying into a cake." She paused. "There is nothing unstable about what I decided." Something moved in his face. "You're going to have to say that in front of a judge." "I know," she said. "I'm ready to." He looked at her for a long moment, the particular way he looked at her when he was trying to find the crack in something and couldn't, and then he nodded. "Once." the way he agreed to things that steadied him. "There's something else," he said. She waited. "Roy Dales is coming here first, before the hearing. The petition allows it a visit supervised, so Ivy can—" He stopped. "So Ivy can be seen with him, so the county can observe how she responds." Elira was very still. "When?" "6 days," Boone said. Across the room, Ivy turned a page. She told Ivy that afternoon. She didn't ask Boone if she should. She knew she should, and she knew that Boone, left to his own judgment, would wait too long out of the desire to protect her from it, and that waiting would be worse. Ivy was a child who handled information better than she handled surprises. She had made that clear from the beginning. She sat beside Ivy on the cot and said plainly, "There's someone coming to visit in 6 days, your mother's brother. His name is Roy." Ivy looked at the constellation book in her hands. She didn't close it. She said, "I know who Roy is." Elira waited. "He came when I was little," Ivy said. "I don't remember the first time. The second time I was 3. He brought me a doll." She paused. "I didn't like dolls." "What did you do with it?" "Gave it to a girl down the street." She turned a page, not reading it. "He smelled like pipe smoke. He talked loud. He made my mother nervous." She paused again. She smiled differently around him than around people she actually liked. "You noticed that at 3 years old," Elira said. "I noticed it later," Ivy said, "when I was thinking about it." Elira looked at her. "Do you know why he's coming?" Ivy was quiet for a moment. "He wants me to go live with him," she said. "Yes, is that what's going to happen?" "Not if we can help it," Elira said. Ivy finally looked up. Her eyes were steady, that particular Ivy steadiness, the one that cost her something to maintain. "You're going to fight for me," she said. It wasn't entirely a question. "Yes," Elira said. "We are." Ivy looked down at the book again. Her jaw worked once, just once. "Nobody's done that before," she said quietly. "Fought for me. My mother, she did everything she could, but she didn't have anyone to fight with. It was just her." She stopped. She was tired at the end. She was very tired. "I know," Elira said. "I don't want to go to Roy's house," Ivy said. She said it flatly, the way she said things that were too important to say with feeling. "I don't know him. I know you. I know this cabin. I know what the fire sounds like in the morning, and what he carves, and what stars you've taught me, and where my bag goes, and—" She stopped herself. Her voice had gotten faster, and she had noticed, and she slowed it down. "I want to stay here," she said. "I want this to be where I stay." Elira reached out and put her hand over Ivy's. "Then that's what we're working toward," she said. Ivy looked at her hand. Then she turned hers over and held it properly. Fingers wrapped around the way you hold something you mean to keep. "Okay," she said. Roy Dales arrived on a Thursday. He was not what Elira had expected, which she recognized was her own failure of imagination. She had built him in her mind as a villain. Large, loud, calculated, because that was easier than the truth, which was that he was a medium-sized man in a good coat who had a decent face and genuine grief in his eyes when he walked into the cabin and looked at Ivy. He had loved his sister. That was real. She could see it immediately, and it complicated everything. "Ivy," he said. His voice was careful. He was trying. Ivy was standing near the table. She had positioned herself there when they heard the wagon. She'd picked her spot. Elira realized the way she always picked her position, with deliberate awareness of exits and distances. "Hello, Roy," she said. He smiled. It was a real smile, but it was the smile of a man who had expected something warmer and was adjusting in real time. "You've gotten bitten big," he said. 4 years does that, Ivy said. The county observer, a woman named Mrs. Farrar, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, sent by the court to document the visit, sat in the corner with a notebook and said nothing. Boone stood near the wood stove. He had the stillness of a man who had made a very specific decision about how he was going to behave in the next 2 hours and was executing it with total precision. He did not cross his arms. He did not crowd the room. He had shaken Roy's hand at the door with a grip that was firm and not threatening, and had said nothing beyond a civil greeting, which Elira knew had cost him considerably. Roy looked at Boone. Something moved in his face, assessment wariness, the instinctive measurement one man performs on another when a child is between them. "Mr. Mercer," he said. "Mr. Dales," Boone said. Roy looked at Elira. "Mrs. Mercer." A pause. "I've heard about you, from some people in town." "I'm sure you have," she said pleasantly. He looked back at Ivy. He crouched down to her level. He'd thought about this. She could tell he'd prepared. Someone had told him to get to eye level and said, "I came because I wanted you to know that you have family, Ivy. Real family. People who knew your mother her whole life, not just—" He stopped himself. He'd been about to say something he'd decided not to say. People who loved her. Ivy looked at him steadily. "I know I have family," she said. "I have my father. And Elira." Roy's jaw tightened. Just slightly. "I mean blood family," he said carefully. "My father is blood family," Ivy said. "And Elira is the kind of family that chose. My mother always said chosen family was the kind that showed up." She paused. "You didn't show up until now." The room was very quiet. Mrs. Farrar wrote something in her notebook. Roy stood up slowly. His face had changed. Not angry, something more interior than anger. A man confronting something he'd told himself a different story about. "Your mother and I had our difficulties," he said to Ivy, but also to the room. "I won't pretend otherwise, but I'm here now." "So are they," Ivy said. She said it without drama. Just the fact of it, plain and final. Roy looked at Boone, then at Elira, then at the cabin, the carvings on the shelf, the constellation book open on the table, the small bird figurine that Boone had finished 2 nights ago sitting beside it, the store ledger with Elira's handwriting in the margins, the extra blanket on the cot folded, the way Ivy folded it every morning without being asked. He looked at all of it, and she saw him understand something. She saw the moment. He understood that whatever he had expected to find here, instability, improvisation, a desperate arrangement of strangers, was not what was in this room. He asked to speak with Ivy alone, which was his right under the terms of the visit. Boone went outside. Elira went to the bedroom. Mrs. Farrar stayed. Elira sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the carved woman on the shelf and listened to the murmur of voices from the main room. Ivy's voice clear and even Roy's lower, moving through registers she couldn't quite track. She heard Ivy laugh once, short, surprised. Something Roy had said. She sat with the complexity of that he was not a monster, that he had genuinely loved. Cora, that he was a man acting out of grief as much as anything else, trying to hold on to his sister through her daughter, and that none of this made him right. After 40 minutes the murmur stopped. She came back out. Ivy was sitting at the table with her constellation book open, which was what she did when she had processed something and needed something familiar to hold. Roy was standing near the door. Mrs. Farrar was still in her corner. Roy looked at Elira when she came in. "She showed me the tin," he said. Elira was still. "She showed me the photograph," he said. "The stones, the ribbon." His voice had changed, quieter, the loud edges worn off it. "That ribbon was from a dress Cora had when she was a girl. I hadn't seen it in 30 years. I didn't know Cora had kept it." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I didn't know Cora had kept a lot of things." Elira didn't answer. "She was keeping them for Ivy," he said. She was saving all those things to give Ivy a history, a sense of where she came from." He looked at Ivy, who was looking at her book but listening to every word. "She did that alone, for 7 years, while she was sick. She kept building that for you." Ivy's eyes didn't move from the page. "She was like that," Ivy said quietly. "She planned ahead." Roy was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Boone, who had come back in quietly from outside and was standing near the door. "I'm going to be honest with you," Roy said. "Please," Boone said. "I came here expecting to find a reason to take her," Roy said. "I came here prepared to make the case that this," he gestured at the cabin, at all of it, "was not adequate, that it was makeshift. That you two were strangers to each other playing house for a judge. He paused. I was wrong. Nobody spoke. I can see she's settled here, Roy said. I can see... He stopped again, and for the first time his voice went unsteady. She's got her spot. She knows where her things go. She laughed just now at something I said, and it sounded like Cora. Exactly like Cora. He pressed his mouth together. I didn't come here for a fight. I came here because Cora was my sister, and I failed her same as everyone else did. And I thought if I could take Ivy, I could... He stopped. It doesn't work that way, Elira said carefully. It doesn't. But you're here now. That's not nothing. Roy looked at her. You'd say that after I filed the petition. Ivy needs people who loved her mother, Elira said. That includes you. That doesn't have to be an argument. He looked at Ivy. Is that what you... Ivy looked up from the book. She considered him with those dark, measuring eyes. You can write to me, she said. If you want. I'd like that, he said. I'll write back, she said. If the letters are interesting. Roy made a sound, not quite a laugh, but the sound underneath one. You sound like Cora, he said softly. Good, Ivy said, and she went back to her book. Roy Dales withdrew the petition the following week. The letter from his lawyer arrived the same morning as a letter from Thorne, confirming his final evaluation. Visit the 90-day mark, the one that would determine whether the arrangement became permanent. Boone set both letters on the table, and Elira read them both and folded them both and put them in the ledger. One down, she said. One to go, he said. She looked at him. Are you worried about Thorne? He thought about it honestly. No, he said. Are you? No, she said. Then we're agreed, he said. She almost smiled. Ivy came in from outside. She'd been sitting on the porch step in the cold, which she did sometimes watching the ridge, the way Boone watched things quietly and with total attention, and looked at the two of them standing at the table with the letters. Roy's not coming back for me, is he? She said. Not the way he came before, Elira said. He withdrew the petition. Ivy processed this. Did you do something? You did, Elira said. You showed him the tin. Ivy was quiet for a moment. I didn't do it for strategy, she said. I did it because he was sad and he missed her. I know, Elira said. That's why it worked. Thorne came on a morning that had gone bright and cold, the kind of morning the mountains made without apology, demanding that you meet it on its own terms. He came alone this time, without the leather case, without the brisk efficiency of a man executing a procedure. He came in, shook hands, accepted the coffee. Elira put in front of him and looked around the cabin with the eyes of someone who had seen a great many arrangements and knew the difference between ones that were performed and ones that were lived in. I saw the carvings on the shelf. 5 of them now, the woman, the horse, the bird Ivy had requested, and 2 others she'd commissioned with the particular authority of a child who had realized she was allowed to ask for things. He saw the constellation book worn at the spine now from handling. He saw the ledger with its careful columns, the store operating remotely, but operating Gerald Hatch, managing the counter with a weekly accounting sent up by wagon. He saw the cot with its extra blanket and the small tin on the shelf above it. He saw Ivy. She came in from outside where she'd been with Boone. They had a morning habit now, the 2 of them, something that had grown without being designed, where Boone checked the property after dawn and Ivy went with him. Not talking much, just moving through the cold together, in the particular companionable silence of 2 people who had decided they were on the same side. She came in and saw Thorne and stopped. You're back, she said. I am, he said. Hello, Ivy. She came to the table and sat down. She looked at him directly, the way she looked at everything that needed assessing. Are you going to ask me questions again? She said. A few, he said. Are they going to be the same questions as last time? He paused. Some of them. Then I'll probably give you the same answers, she said. Except they'll mean more now because more time has passed. Thorne looked at her for a moment. Something in his professional composure shifted not much, just enough to be visible. "All right," he said. "Let's start there. Tell me what's changed." Ivy looked at the table for a moment, gathering. Then she said, "I stopped waiting to leave." Thorne was still. "When I first came," Ivy said, I kept track of what I'd need to take if I had to go fast. My bag was always packed. I knew where my tin was every minute. I had a plan for if things went wrong." She paused. "I don't do that anymore." "When did you stop?" Thorne asked. She thought about it. "After the nightmare," she said. "After he held on." Boone was standing near the stove. He said nothing. His face said everything he wasn't going to say. "And her," Thorne said. He nodded toward Elira. Ivy looked at Elira. A long look. Measuring, but differently from before. Not measuring safety or probability, measuring something else. Something that didn't have an easy name. "She promised me something the first week," Ivy said. "About my tin. That nobody would touch it. That it was mine." She paused. "She kept it. She keeps all her promises. I've been paying attention." What do you want, Ivy?" Thorne said. "Simply, just that." "I want this to be it," she said. "I want this cabin, and these people, and this mountain, and this constellation book, and the bird he made me, and the stars. Elira taught me, and I want it to be the place I come back to for the rest of my life." She said it with a child's absolute certainty, the kind that adults lose and spend the rest of their lives trying to recover. "I want this to be my home." The cabin was very quiet. Thorne looked at Boone. "Mr. Mercer." "Sir," Boone said. "This started under unusual circumstances," Thorne said. "It did," Boone said. "And you'd characterize the current situation as mine," Boone said. Simply, without elaboration. "She's my daughter, and this is my family, and whatever I have to do to keep it, I'll do. That's the whole thing." Thorne looked at Elira. She met his gaze. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. "When we first met, I asked if you felt coerced." "I remember," she said. "I'm asking a different question now," he said. "I'm asking if you're staying." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Boone, at the set of his jaw, and the steadiness of his eyes, and the hands that had built this cabin, and carved small birds for a grieving child, and held on in the dark without letting go. She looked at Ivy, who was watching her with those dark eyes that had learned over 90 days to hold something other than calculation. "Yes," she said. "I'm staying." Thorne wrote in his notebook for a long moment. Then he closed it. "I'll file my final report this week," he said. "I don't anticipate any complications." He stood. He shook Boone's hand. He shook Elira's hand. He looked at Ivy. "You're a remarkable young woman," he said. "I know," Ivy said. He laughed, a short real sound that surprised all of them, including him. "Take care of each other," he said. "We know how," Ivy said. He picked up his hat and walked out the door. The three of them stood in the cabin after the sound of his wagon had faded down the mountain, and nobody said anything for a moment, because there was a particular fullness to the silence that none of them wanted to break too quickly. Then Ivy said, "Is it done?" "It's done," Elira said. Ivy exhaled. Not dramatically, just a long, quiet breath, the breath of a person setting down something they've been carrying. She walked to the shelf and picked up the carved bird. She turned it in her hands. "It's good," she said to Boone. "You got the wings right." "You told me what you wanted," he said. "You listened," she said. He looked at her. "I'm going to keep doing that." She put the bird back on the shelf carefully, exactly where it had been. Then she turned around and crossed the room, and without ceremony, without announcement, the way she did everything that mattered, she walked up to Boone and put her arms around him. He went very still for a moment. Then he put his arms around her and held on. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The holding said it all of it every hard week, and every silent morning, and every test she'd run, and every time he'd passed without knowing it, all of it compressed into this one plain human thing. A child choosing her father. A father staying chosen. Elira stood across the room and watched, and felt something in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Not grief, not the complicated mix of purpose and practicality that had carried her through the last 3 months, but something simpler and more dangerous than either of those things. Something that felt like home. Ivy pulled back and looked up at Boone. "You still make your face look like a fist sometimes," she said. "I know," he said. "You're getting better at it, though," she said. "I'm working on it," he said. She let go of him and turned and looked at Elira, and then she walked to her and held out her hand. Not for a hug. Not yet, that was coming, but not yet. Just her hand open, offered the way you offer something you've decided belongs to someone else. Elira took it. "Are you going to keep teaching me the stars?" Ivy asked. "Every clear night," Elira said. "Good," Ivy said. "I want to learn all of them." "There are a lot," Elira said. "That's okay," Ivy said. "We have time." She dropped Elira's hand and went and picked up her constellation book and went to sit near the window, and the afternoon light came in around her, and she opened to a page she'd read 20 times and started reading it again, and Boone went to the table and picked up his carving wood and his knife and sat down, and Elira went and got the ledger and sat across from him, and the three of them filled the cabin with the ordinary sound of a family at rest. Not a family that had been built the way families were supposed to be built. Not one that had arrived through the expected doors in the expected order, but one that had been built the hardest way through choice, through showing up, through staying when staying cost something real. Through a question asked in a general store on a cold morning by a woman who decided that the child on the other end of the answer mattered more than the risk. Through a man who walked into a room full of people and said the most humiliating thing a proud person could say, and meant every word of it. Through a little girl who kept track of promises kept and decided in her own time that these people were worth unpacking for. The fire burned. The mountain held them. And the family that no one in Redemption Ridge had expected not. Gerald Hatch, not Clara Moody, not Thorne with his notebook, not Roy Dales with his grief. Not anyone turned out to be exactly as real as the woman who had signed her name to 6 conditions and said yes. They were home, all 3 of them, at last and for good.